we have Clint back for another episode. So, Clint, how you doing?
Doing fantastic. Happy to be back. Looking forward to it.
All right, excellent. Well, we're happy to have you here.
Very busy past couple of weeks. Thanks, man.
Oh yeah. Well, what have you been up to? We can do. How about you do your introduction as to what's been going on in your world, and then I'll follow you up.
Okay, sure, sounds good, buddy. We've had kind of back-to-back shows. We vended a show out in St. Louis last weekend. Vended in Indianapolis today. Just drove home and ran in, hopped on this. And been two very, very good shows for us. And then, of course, I mean, how busy the week is in between those shop and things are going well and things are going hectic for sure. But I guess it's being busy is a good thing. Not something I'm going to complain about at all.
Oh yeah, no,
making me happy.
All right, glad things are going well. So last time we talked, you had mentioned about all the I don't want to say trials and tribulations, but this would happen with anybody that's doing a move, and you moved your animals into your shop. How's like things coming out of cycling and brumation and all that working out for you?
It's interesting to say the least. I will say, I mean, going through this winter, because I do have a small number of ball pythons, and with those I was dealing with more stuck sheds than I've ever dealt with before, and it's because I'm in a much drier environment than where I kept everything previously. So I've got that on that, and now we're waking some stuff up, and we're finding. I had one black rat snake kind of perish out of nowhere. Really don't see why on that one, but we're just figuring out how everything's going to work now in these new rooms, and I think it's coming together. But figuring out a few of the nuances with getting temperatures just right, getting humidity levels just right. What's going to work here, what's not going to work there. I've moved the Asians out of the room I initially had them in because of where that's located in the building. It tended to become one of the hotter rooms of the building last summer. So they've been shifted and they're more centralized now. But while I still think it'll be a successful year in terms of breeding, I don't expect it to be one of the most stellar years I've ever had in terms of production, just because I think a lot of things are either going to need to have a full year to cycle. Yep. We've got a lot that we just want to put more weight on. That there's not been too many of my animals that get years off, and I think that this year is going to be a year that several of them are going to get that year off just to kind of rebuild and get some more attention put on them.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Anytime you move your critters from one place to another, I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. It's just not the same for you, for them, for everything. So I hope ultimately it pans out for you in the end. But,
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I think we'll be just fine. Like I said, just give that full 12-month cycle, and I think we'll be in business.
All right. So anything else new in your world, or is that pretty much, I mean, not that that's not much, but you know what I mean.
That is my world. Right?
That's it? Okay.
Yeah, that's a constant ongoing thing. And, we got a few weeks, I'll say a few weeks off in air quotes from shows, but then we've got Tinley coming up.
Yep.
So we'll see everybody out there.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be able to make it to Tinley, but it turns out the following week is a pretty big conference for all my students, and I thought that I could swing it, but in retrospect, I don't think so. But I know I'll be able to make it to Schaumburg, I think, in the summertime. So not exactly Tinley, but it's like Tinley Light, or maybe it is the alternative Tinley. I don't know. Haven't been there. So.
The off-brand.
Yeah, there you go.
I love it.
But no, in my world, things are obviously coming out of brumation. I breed my false water cobras historically end of December, beginning of January. So if those were going to take now's when I start to see some swelling and obvious behavioral shifts. And when a false water cobra is ravaged, they become these ravenous beasts that want to kill and eat everything in sight. And I currently have 4 females that are doing that. So I'm kind of hopeful that we're going to have another pretty good year with the false water cobras. And other than that, things are coming out of brumation for me. I purposely put things down kind of late because I knew that my January and February were going to be 2 pretty hectic months. So everything's coming out in March. So starting tomorrow, actually, I'll be pulling everybody out and getting that up and running. I've got a kid doing hognose snakes for their thesis. And now that the Dipsadded book is done, I'm like basically going to be doing Heterodon nonstop for the next 2 years. So I'm really excited to get rocking and rolling with those guys. And then on the book front, some exciting news. The book is now done. Russ sent it off to the publisher to print a couple copies. We get those copies in hand, kind of go through, highlight issues, find the issues, kind of with the final edit, fix them, and then the book goes to print. So this is happening. Those of you who've heard me talk about this for the past 2 years, absolutely will be happening. That's all I'm going to say about it until I have it in my hand, though. So, but there have been a couple people that have messaged me asking, like, what the hell's going on with the book? So that's what's going on with the book. And I can honestly say I have learned a lot. The next one will definitely be a much more fluid process than this first one. But no, that's pretty much been it for my world. Without further ado, I think we'll just jump right into this. That sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So our guest tonight is Connor Wardle. Connor is currently pursuing his undergraduate degree, and I think he's close to finishing based off the conversation we had before we went to air in Texas. He has an Instagram page called Naturalistic Herps, where you can basically go and see Connor. He's pretty familiar in Colubrid circles, especially here in the States. And I would say that Connor is most well known for the fact that he keeps an awful lot of native species of colubrids from across Texas. And not only does he keep the animals, but he does outreach with his collection and is really big into education as well. So tonight with Connor, we're going to be talking specifically about the genus Masticophis, which are the Coachwhips and North American Whipsnakes. When you use that word whipsnake, I think it's kind of important to give at least a geographic context because there's a lot of different colubrids, colubrines across our planet that have that term whipsnake associated with them. But Connor also is a keeper and works with Louisiana pine snakes for an AZA facility. I think it's Fort Worth, if I'm not.
Yeah, Fort Worth Zoo. Yes, sir.
That's correct? Yeah. So without further ado, Connor, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Working a lot. Like y'all, I've got snakes coming up out of brumation. I got some pretty exciting first pairings for me with a few species that I just haven't had an opportunity to really work with yet. So I'm really excited for that. As far as the Masticophis goes, I'll be pairing Western Coachwhips, the tan phase, red phase, and then red racers as well, the Masticophis Pisceus. Really excited for the Pisceus pairings. A really nice locality pairing that I'm working with. It's going to be pretty awesome. Hopefully it works out.
All right. Yeah, we hope it works out for you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of standard issue to ask our guests like how they got into this whole thing. Okay. And I know that you've been on the herpetoculture podcast with Justin and Jake and Phil. But, while you gave your background then, you can certainly give your background now. So
yeah, definitely.
Let the listeners know how somebody ultimately ends up getting into colubrids, and not only colubrids, but kind of an obscure genus that's not oftentimes kept.
Right. Yeah. So probably just like everybody else, I grew up and just started catching, your toads and frogs and little ground skinks, stuff like that, Gulf Coast toads and the little brown skinks, like I said, things like that. I'd keep them for the weekend, and then my folks would make me kind of release them because they didn't want to have any pets that I couldn't really take care of responsibly, But yeah, so I did that for a while, and then I got involved in Boy Scouts. And my first summer camp, I went to Worth Ranch Scout Camp out in Palo Pinto, Texas. Really awesome place. And at the time, they were teaching reptile study merit badge. And one of my friends talked me into signing up for that. And until then, I didn't really have any experience with snakes or lizards or anything like that. I was actually I can admit this now. I actually had a little bit of a fear of snakes at the beginning there. So one of the requirements, if you're not familiar with the Reptile Study Merit Badge, is you have to own a reptile for a period of 90 days, or you have to go to a zoo every single day for a period of 2 weeks or something like that. You're supposed to note with either the animal you observe in the zoo or the animal you keep at home, note any growths, things like that. Like if you notice the animal growing, if you notice it going into shed, things like that, when it's eating or whatnot, which would be kind of hard to do at a zoo facility. But just kind of keep records on your animal and just kind of watch it progress and grow and things like that. So started off with a Chinese water dragon from PetSmart that some high school kid told me would be an excellent pet for my first reptile. It did not turn out to be that great. Yes, I got that. I got into a few leopard geckos, things like that. And then eventually I got into breeding little brown skinks, those little ground skinks, which are really neat, really cool little lizard. And then I joined the vet med pathway in my high school. And one of the requirements for that course through the 4 years of high school was we would need 40 hours a semester in some type of animal-related field. We could do internships, things like that, or just get a job doing something, basically like dog grooming or whatever. And I wanted to be different and cool, so my dad, going back to Boy Scouts, he's very active in the council level and things like that. There used to be a Boy Scout facility called the Longhorn Activity Center that had a collection of North American king snakes, rat snakes, milk snakes, things like that, and a few odds and ends, like we had a few bull snakes and gopher snakes and stuff like that. But it was a complete collection of every North American Lamprepeltis and Pantherophis there. It was really excellent opportunity to work for them, just kind of cleaning racks, things like that. And then I got into helping out with the educational shows. Eventually I run my own snake shows and kind of got up into a manager role there. That's where I learned how to breed snakes, doing my first attempt at that. My first species I bred was checkered garter snakes, back in 2015 or 16 or something like that. But yeah, it's just kind of gone from there. I pursued a bunch of different avenues, and I've done the Noah's Ark keeping. But more recently I've kind of, honed in on Massascophus. I guess really the reason that I got into Massascophus, am I ranting too much? Is this okay?
Oh, this is perfect, man.
Okay, awesome, cool. I don't want to get too tangential or whatever. But anyway, so getting into Massascophus, I worked, so I grew up, I started working the summers as a summer camp counselor in the nature department at that same Boy Scout summer camp, Worth Ranch, my first summer camp there. So one of the things as nature staff that we would do is we would get snake calls. So we'd have to go, if someone found a snake on a trail or if it was in somebody's campsite and causing an issue or something like that, to kind of prevent any unfortunate situations, we would remove the snake from the campsite and either relocate it back further in the back part of the property there. Or if it was a new species that we hadn't kept, that we don't have an example of in the nature lodge at the time, we would collect that animal, keep it for the 3 weeks of summer camp, feed it and things like that, and then just let it go at the end of camp where we found it. It was 2017. I came across my first Coachwhip just kind of out there on the crawl. and I just ran after it, did a jump and diving leap, and grabbed the tail there, and it just, I don't know, it did well eating, and I decided, I mean, everything I've heard about Coachwhips is that they're not going to eat for you in captivity, especially rodents, and they're going to be super bitey and things like that, and just everything that I was reading was not true with this particular animal. So I decided that I would take it home and give it a shot, and I still have that animal today, and it's doing great.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I guess from Massacophis, I kind of expanded into Hypsiglena, your night snakes. I've got Lake Chapala garter snake, some rubber boas, and then I've got some desert glossy snakes as well. And then a few other, I guess, animals within the Massacophis genus there. So, yeah.
Cool. So, another question.
I can tell you, this is certainly an episode that. No, sorry, but I was going to say, this is certainly an episode I'm excited about with the fact that we're going to be going into so much with Coachwhips, because that's a species personally I've never worked with, never had any involvement with, and I'm pretty excited to hear all about what you're doing with it, Connor. I'm actually pretty excited to be speaking with Connor as well. As we discussed earlier, we're Facebook friends, but have never really talked. So one of us, I guess, must send random requests out to men in the hobby. We don't know which one, but are probably both.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that you kind of gravitated towards. Is there a reason that's drawing you to them?
So they're just like, just their facial structure is so cool, and compared to, it might just be the way that we were keeping the Lampripeltis and Pantherophis time, at that facility they were kept in rack systems, which I don't really have any issues with people keeping snakes in racks. There's a good application for it, but they just kind of seemed to, they weren't as interesting or active as these Coachwhips were. So they're more active, and they just look so cool. I can't really describe it like with words as well. But like the coolest thing for me is waking up in the morning, the lights turn on, and then I see this giant this super long red snake, or like my Pisces that I was showing Zach earlier, or the Philanatus, the Sonoran whipsnake, just basking, just taking everything in, super red, super blue. They just look so cool. So,
yeah.
I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but
that's totally a good answer.
Yeah. Okay.
And along those same lines,
absolutely.
You mentioned why you're into Massacophis, but most of the snakes you mentioned were Colubrids, and we like to ask this question on our podcast. So, what is it about Colubrid specifically, and in your case, the native species, that draws you in? Because as you know, being a herpetoculturalist, you can own now animals from around the planet, and you can own retics, boas, all the way down to little diminutive decay snakes if you want to. But
right,
what about Colubrids?
Those are pretty fun too. Yeah. Yeah. So as far as what's kind of drawn me to those, it's just kind of what I've been around the most, and there's just so many number one, they're a little bit more accessible for me, which I guess that doesn't really matter because the internet now, I guess. But there's just so many cool localities, and there's so many snakes that people just don't care about because they're brown. Or they don't eat lizards. They don't eat snakes super easily, And I just think some of that stuff is super cool. And digging into so one of the big things that I worked with at the activity center breeding was Alterna, So that's where I got super into localities and stuff. And I don't know, just the colors that you see on Massacophis throughout their range is extremely variable, You can find almost any shade you want. That's I don't know. they look super cool. Let me go back to Colubrid. Sorry, I'm kind of getting on a tangent there. Sorry. So Colubrids, as far as the general care goes, I mean, it's pretty. I don't want to say it's exactly the same across the board,
Yep.
But the species that I'm kind of keeping now, they're primarily southwestern U.S. herps, pretty similar temperature and humidity gradient or needs and things like that. So I just kind of keep what makes the most sense for what my passion is, It's kind of I can't tree boa and keep it in the same.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna jump right into the keeping of these guys, and I know when we talked earlier. I think it's kind of important for you to kind of discuss your history with them because when we were talking before the show, you mentioned how you initially kept some or a handful of them in racks, and now you've kind of segued over to this more naturalistic methodology of keeping with glass aquaria and things of that nature. But if you don't mind just kind of first talking about enclosures, benefits to the current keeping and how the way you kept them in the past led you to where you're at today.
Okay, cool. So I guess the way that I started off keeping Coachwhips was just in big rack systems. I forget the exact size of the rack. There were kind of some old animal plastic racks there. But I would notice, like whenever I tried to breed them, they wouldn't. I never saw any locks or anything like that. So I would go and kind of text a few other guys that were interested in Mascophis and things like that. And the biggest thing is a daylight cycle with these. So keeping them in racks, number one, you're not gonna really get the daylight cycle that you need. And then also a big thing is temperature and humidity gradients. That's why I keep them in kind of larger enclosures so I can keep a pretty good temperature range and humidity gradient there. Because I know a lot of these, or at least the ones that I'm keeping, are primarily desert animals, but it's still important to provide a nice humidity gradient. But if you're like the hot spots in their enclosures that I'm trying to hit are between like 95 and 100 degrees. So in a rack system, it's pretty hard to do that without you don't have the space for a temperature gradient there. And then also ventilation is important as well. That's another thing with the humidity there rather than, I guess my biggest pet peeve is hearing people ask what humidity they should shoot for, like it's a percentage in their entire enclosure. I'm like, no, I'm thinking like a shed box or a humid hide or something like that is best, so you can achieve that gradient there, so the animal can kind of. I'm not sure what the term would be. I'm just going to make something up like hydro-regulate. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it. Just they can kind of go from like the drier side to the humidity box there, or something like that. So just keeping all those factors in mind, decided it would be best to transition to more display type enclosures. I currently have both some kind of larger aquarium setups that I've kind of scrapped off of Facebook Marketplace. They're pretty heavy. And then I've got some the 36 inches tall by 18 deep by 36 long Exoterras front opening enclosures. I really like the front opening rather than the aquariums, because it's less of a predatory feel when you're going into the enclosure and things like that. Easier to navigate as well. But the main goal, or the big, if I could do it exactly the way I wanted to right now, I would do something more of like a 6 foot long, 6 to 7 foot long by 3 feet deep by 4 foot tall PVC enclosure. So right now I'm in the process of just saving up for those enclosures, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So I do have one question about, it's in addition to the enclosure. So I want to talk a little bit about lighting for these guys.
Right.
Because I have a limited amount of experience with Masticophis. The only one that I've collected was in Kansas, though I've been all over their range in the eastern Coachwhips here in the southeastern United States. But one of the things I did notice when I was out with the whips was we would see them while we were road cruising, and I don't think I've ever seen a more alert snake. Up until that point in my life, I had messed around a lot with Colubrid, so tons and tons of southern black racers, northern black racers, and I've had them do the periscoping and and then you see this black flash, but the way that the Coachwhips moved was like a whole other level, and it seemed like they were also moving when nothing else was moving. So like from 10 to 2 in the afternoon while we were on that trip in Kansas, that was like, if you were going to see a snake out, it was going to be a Coachwhip. From like 7 to 11, it would be bull snakes, rat snakes, garter snakes, ribbon snakes, and unfortunately no freaking hognose snakes, because that's what we went out there to find. But it really kind of impressed upon me that this is not only a diurnal snake, but like a snake that was active when it was very warm. So along that line of thinking, what is your lighting situation for these guys, and what kind of temperature gradients are you giving them? Like, are they getting pretty hot, or is that not necessarily what you do? Like, just speak to that if you don't mind, please.
Right. So what I do, I'm blanking on the specific wattages, but I've got the kind of messing around right now between the Arcadia bulbs and then your just standard expensive for no reason like Zilla type heat bulbs. Figuring out, trying to see which ones my animals like a little bit more than the other. Just trying to find what works best for the animal, but is also cost efficient as well. I don't want to compromise on the money side to be like a detriment to the animals themselves. So that's why I'm just trying to figure that out right now, see what's best there. But as far as the temperatures for heating that I'm using there, I try to hit one hot spot of like it sits around like 97 degrees or so.
Okay.
So it usually fluctuates between 95 and 100 depending on what the temperature is outside, because there's a window in the room,
nice.
Which kind of changes things a little bit. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's the hot spot there, and then the ambient room temperature is between 78 to 80 degrees there. So yeah, that's kind of the gradient that I kind of try to provide there, and to achieve those nice kind of basking temperatures. I've got quite a few, like whenever I see people in my neighborhood just kind of trimming trees and things like that, I'll use a lot of oak limbs and things like that, because I do see them like whenever I'm out field herping and I come across a western Coachwhip, the first thing they're gonna do is shoot up a Mexican juniper tree. That's usually what they do, unless there's a little mouse hole or something like that they end up going down in. But more often than not, they're going to shoot up a tree. So I try and provide the branches there, because that also kind of helps with their just being comfortable in the enclosure as well, But as far as what I've been seeing with these animals, they'll go up, they'll bask for 30 to 40 minutes or so at that higher temperature there, and then they'll kind of stick to the bottom for the rest of the day. Because I guess it kind of dips down to about 75 or so at night in the room, just depending on like the temperature or so outside. So yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
And then on the lighting end of things,
UVB lighting.
I was going to talk about UVB. Do we do UVB? No UVB? What do you do with that?
Yes, I use UVB for all of my animals except for the albino western Coachwhip. So I'm not familiar, I guess back whenever I first heard about caring for albino snakes and things like that, there was someone just said something about, you don't want to use any excess lighting on UVB, on albino animals, just because it kind of impairs their vision. Now, I'm not really sure where I heard that, and I've been kind of looking into that a little bit more, just to see if I could find any like actual proof behind that. I'm not sure if that's just somebody said something on a Facebook group once whenever I was first getting into reptiles, and I just kind of went with that. So I need to look into that a little bit more. But particularly because that albino Western Coachwhip has kind of got a slower growth to it compared to other animals, other Mascopus that I've kept. So I'm looking into whether that might just be a kind of deficiency with UVB there. So anyway, but yes, I do provide UVB for all my animals on that kind of 12-hour photo period there.
I could, given the level of activity that these animals have in their response to sunlight, this is a critter where I know that I always hear people on podcasts and they're like, well, I mean, you can do what you want, but at some point we do kind of have to pull the trigger and say there are definitely going to be animals that are going to need the UVB. And if you are a animal that is diurnal as hell, slithering around definitely when it is hot as hell, I don't care if there's a change in your blood chemistry or not. Behaviorally, that's probably an important thing for your welfare, in human care. So that's cool that you do the UVB.
And that's another reason that the racks just weren't working out.
Yeah.
So I've noticed a lot more active animals with that lighting there. And they just, I don't know if you can really tell if a snake's happy or not, but they're more active. They're more smelling around and things like that in the morning. So it's nice. It's nice. So.
Sure. So substrate, you kind of talked about cage decorations, which would be things like branches, basically stuff that you can get from outside.
Right.
What's your substrate for these guys? Because I'm certain I feel like moisture could be the enemy with them, but I don't know if that's just a little bit of folklore husbandry or not. And then what do you do? Like, do you have any kind of rock ledges or hides or anything like that in there with them?
Right. So as far as substrate goes, I make my kind of own mix of it's pretty much just topsoil and a little bit of sand in there as well. Just try and replicate some, with the animals that I have locality information on, I'll ask for habitat photos or just kind of photos of like where these animals were kind of near like the nearest area to where these people herp, from where these animals are collected. And then just try and like match the dirt as best as I can. I heard, I listened to the Project Herpetoculture as well. And Phil was talking about whenever he kept his Baja collared lizards, he would come back from the Baja area with just a bag of sand and dirt from where he collected these lizards. And I would love to do that for all my animals, just to kind of help. I feel like that kind of helps lock in the humidity as well. Sometimes with the proper substrate from the area, but that's why I provide those humid hides as well. But yeah, so it's pretty much just a sand and topsoil mixture there. A little heavier on the topsoil there, just because I think I don't like just the bare sand that kind of sticks to like their cloaca and things like that. Yeah. I don't want to get any impactions or things like that. But yeah, whenever I notice an animal going into shed and things like that, if they're not using their shed box, I'll spray it in the entire enclosure, like a deep soak, like a rain kind of, and then I get a perfect shed there if the animal just doesn't recognize that the humid hide is there. So yeah, that's a substrate there. And then as far as hides and other cage decor, I use a lot of just tile, just because it's super easy to clean. There's not like any texture like on your $70 reptile hide for no reason from PetSmart or whatever. The textures and stuff are harder to clean. You can get bacteria growth and things like that. So I just use bricks and tile. I'll do different layers, like levels of brick and tile. That way there's kind of there's different like cracks and stuff, different crevices where there's different temperatures in there. And I'll tuck in a little bit of sphagnum, moist sphagnum in some of those crevices there. So there's also some humidity gradient within that as well. And it's just an excellent way to thermoregulate with also staying hidden or feeling nice and secure in a nice tighter space there.
Sweet. And so on the water and humidity, range, are you obviously they have access to clean water all the time, I imagine. But
Right.
are you misting these guys often, or do you let their cage dry out, or do you dry it out, soak it, dry, soak? Like, what's kind of your humidity range or regime?
Yeah.
Just given these guys are mostly, I'm assuming most of your stock currently are wild caught. Is that correct?
For the most part, all of the Mascophis that I keep right now are wild caught. Even that albino is, I can talk about that later.
Sure.
But kind of interesting story there. But yeah, so as far as spraying the cage down and things like that, I pretty much only do that if I notice them going into blue. Because in the past, before I started spraying down the enclosure, I would notice they would shed, and then it'd be the patchier sheds, and I would notice a little bit of scale cracking as well. So I just think it's best just whenever the animal goes into blue, or if it's getting kind of that opaque or glossy tint to it, just give it a nice spray down, get the soil not like sopping wet, but a nice little just once over, nice and kind of damp there on that top layer there, and it usually does plenty there. But if you think about like where some of these, especially your whip snakes, especially like the striped whip snake that I keep, those are often found in like the granite rock crevices and things like that, where they'll share habitat with like some Zanata and different Crotalus and things like that. But just thinking about like the water that might be like in those cracks, I think that they get a little bit more hydration than people think from, I guess, their habitat. The water kind of pools back in there and things like that. So anyway, yeah.
And then my final question, and I think we've like hammered husbandry, which is awesome. Feeding these things. So, these are active pursuit site predators.
Right.
Are you doing one big meal a week or a bunch of little meals, or what the hell prey item are they eating? I'm really curious to see how you approach feeding something like a Coachwhip or a striped whipsnake, one of the other guys.
Yeah. So with my Coachwhips, I definitely have a little bit more of a rodent heavier diet there, just because they are kind of larger, girthier animals. At least from my experience seeing them out there in the field, and the whipsnakes, your North American whipsnakes, I should say, typically more of the slender, kind of more of the I don't want to say arboreal, but they are they're just narrower and thinner animals there typically. So with my Coachwhips, I was actually pretty lucky. I mean, from all the information that I was reading about them online whenever I first started off with that first tan phase, was that, they're extremely difficult to get onto rodents, and they're primarily lizard and snake eaters. I actually caught a Western Coachwhip once at that same Boy Scout camp that ended up regurgitating a still living baby H-Rox, which was pretty cool.
Whoa.
First time seeing one.
Wow.
So that was definitely interesting, kind of threw me for a loop there. But yeah, anyway, so as far as feeding in captivity, I'll feed them rodents. Typically do smaller meals than they can take more often.
Gotcha.
So I would do like for an adult Western Coachwhip, they could feed on like an extra large mouse, or even some people feed them rats sometimes, like the smaller end of the rats there. And rats are super fatty, and you get like really obese Coachwhips, and that's a big issue in the hobby as a whole. With the people that do keep Coachwhips. I saw somebody post a picture of a red-faced Coachwhip in a vision cage a few months ago. It was just like, it looked like an Eastern king snake, like the girth there, and it was just didn't have a neck at all. It was not great. So I try and keep them on the leaner side, smaller rodents more often. I typically feed them 5 to 6 days. Doesn't really seem like a huge difference between the 7 to 8 day normal feeding schedule. But I'll do that typically, small to large mice, there with the Coachwhips. And then if I notice they're getting too chunky, I'll kind of stretch those days out a little bit more, or I'll offer, chicks as well. Cause those are a little bit more lean, than your mice there. But yeah, and then as far as your whipsnakes go, I primarily feed those quail chicks and like fuzzies and things like that. My adult striped whipsnake, I do give that guy hoppers, and then the quail in addition. But my Sonoran whipsnake that I've got, he's still I've got him on kind of every other feeding. It's quail or it's fuzzies or things like that.
Are you drop feeding or tongue feeding?
Yeah, so it really depends on the individual animal. Some of my animals will not eat with me in the room at all. With these being wild caught and with them being very visual animals, visual hunters there, you do kind of have to start them on live prey.
Okay.
But I had some animals where I just say, oh, what the hell, let's just try it. You just throw in I guess a drop feed there would be the term there. Just a frozen thawed. Some of them will take this frozen thawed with no issues, and they do great. Some of them rely or need a little bit more of like a tease feeding there. Then I've had some animals that just don't eat anything. So, I mean, if they start deteriorating as far as that body composition goes, I'll have to assist feed a little bit until I get to brumation. And then post brumation, they end up they'll end up pretty much taking whatever. But yeah, and then there's a lot of scenting tricks too, to get some of these smaller guys going. Just all your usual Alterna tricks, the boiling, the branding, things like that.
Yeah.
Lizard scenting. Like I said, I keep your night snakes, the Hypsiglena, and the desert glossy snakes and stuff. So I've got like 500 frozen anoles in my freezer, and scarlet kings too. So they need those as well. I've got anoles in the freezer, and I make this little like anole pate. You just kind of take the little bullet blender. You can just blend up X amount of lizards there, get a nice little milkshake there, freeze it, and then thaw it out. There's going to be like a little oil level there over the top, and that's kind of like that's what you need to get them, I guess, scented over. That's worked with almost every single problem feeder I've had. You just toss a little pinky or whatnot in that. Sometimes live, so it just really depends on the situation with the animal, I guess. But yeah, those are the tricks that have worked for me. And then I know a guy, William Huntsman, the guy I'm working on the book with, which we'll talk about later. He uses this thing called, it's like a little feeding noose is what he calls it. It's like one of those, those clear snake tubes that people use for tube venomous. Yeah. So it's like the thinnest one, and it'll have like a little loop that goes down through it, like a little fishing line or something like that. And he'll noose the head of a mouse there, and he'll tease feed, but like off of tongs so that you can't, like it's using the clear tube rather than the tongs. So that way there's less anxiety or whatever you want to call it there with this big scary human with a giant tongs or whatnot. And that just kind of replicating a mouse running around the enclosure, that works pretty cool, pretty well as well for your more visual animals that won't take the frozen thawed or scented things like that. So
I'm admiring this dedication because it sounds like I got a lot of tips and tricks here.
Yeah, well, it all kind of transferred over from working with, like I said, the Alterna and I guess some of your smaller milks, the Utah milks and things like that. They're just a pain to get started. I'll
tell you, I got a couple questions for you. First, before I forget, I didn't want to interrupt. When you were talking about lighting, you had mentioned, figuring out which bulbs you want to use, the different brands and whatnot. And you mentioned Arcadia, and I do want to say I'm a big fan of the Arcadia UVB bulbs. I've been using those now over the past 6 months, and I'm a big fan of what they do and how well the animals respond to them. So I just wanted to mention that since you happen to bring that brand up that you're looking at using. So you also had said earlier that you'd always heard how hard they were. They don't do well in captivity. They're a problem snake in captivity, and I've always heard the exact same thing. In fact, just today at the show, I had a woman walk by the table, and she was, so you don't have any Coachwhips? No, I almost said nobody does, because no one works with Coachwhips. They're too hard. But I didn't say that, of course. So my question is, what made you want to take that challenge on? Hearing, how hard and difficult they are, or that's, what you were being told. What made you decide, I want to jump into that?
Well, I really like a challenge, something new, just trying to fill kind of a niche and kind of show people. I don't like prove people wrong. I don't want to say that. But I mean, with taking that first Coachwhip, like I said at that scout camp, we threw the laws to do a Coachwhip in the building. Set it up in a 40-gallon, which was, looking back, not ideal for an adult Western Coachwhip. And then the feeding day a few days later, and I just tossed in a few frozen thawed small mice, and I mean they were gone the next day. I mean there was no work at all to get that animal on frozen thawed, I just don't I don't think people give them a chance just because you come across them in the wild, you pick them up, the first thing they're going to do, usually the first thing they're going to do is just try and bite you in the face or chew on your thumb or something like that. They're going to poop all over you, fling their tail. And then I've had a few like alligator roll, kind of like a corkscrew thing. And it just kind of sets a bad taste in your mouth. Like if they're going to act like this in your hand, when you first pick them up, they're not going to be like a corn snake or something like that. It's just kind of chill out. So I guess just people just don't want to put the effort into them. And then the people that have put the effort into breeding them, I mean, there's some people that just give up because the babies are just too hard to just get onto rodents. And I mean, not everything will take a rodent. You got to start with lizards, and you got to be okay with feeding lizards. You got to be okay with frog scenting for other things, and just trying different things. Not everything's going to want to eat a rodent, and you got to be okay with that. So,
I think I kind of love the point you're making there. It's something I guess as we talk more and more about the less kept species, that we really need to remember it. And, as I said, we often have heard these don't do well in captivity, when I guess the true statement is these don't do well in captivity under the conditions we have tried previously.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to. So, like you said, it's not about proving people wrong. It's about finding that right formula. I think that's just about anything can be kept in captivity if we had the right formula, the right size enclosure, the right, temps, the right food. So that's an excellent point there.
And then also,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and also like making that information accessible. Like there's people that do keep these, and I don't want to say, well, I guess the term is like gatekeeping. I guess that's kind of whatever. But I mean, just helping people out, showing what you're doing, answering questions, and not just saying, oh, you shouldn't keep this because you've only kept like corn snakes or whatever, or ball pythons or whatnot. I don't know. I'm not hating on those crowds there. I realize that they're not for everybody, but I mean, if people have a passion, or if they want to learn about them, I'm always trying to answer questions and try to make them just spread that information out there a little bit better. So
that's great. So I mentioned earlier that this is a species I don't have any knowledge on really, as far as never kept them. I think I've only seen 2 Coachwhips ever in person, a couple wild caught on tables somewhere at a show. I'm very familiar with black racers. We've got plenty of those around, and that's probably the most similar animal to a Coachwhip in my neck of the woods. So I think like my next question would be, or can you talk about their behaviors in captivity? What are some of those quirks that you see? You know what I mean? What are some of their activities, day, night, just...
Yeah.
If I was sitting here watching this snake, what would I see?
Yeah, so they're definitely more offhands as far as captivity goes. They're not gonna they'll tolerate a little bit of handling. I'll take them and snap photos or things like that if I'm going to be like going in their cage and cleaning things, just because I don't want them to jump out of the enclosure and get behind my bed or whatnot, as far as just habits from what I've noticed, I mean that they'll come out, like I said, in the morning as soon as the lights come on, come up, they'll bask for a little bit, and then they'll kind of cruise around the enclosure, and then they'll kind of do a little bit of hiding, like in their little crevices and things like that. I'll see them whenever they start to get closer to like the day before feeding or things like that. They'll come out and they'll kind of like periscope, which is like super cool, and they'll just kind of like look around. That albino that I've got is probably one of the more friendly animals that I have. And I'll open up the enclosure and as I'm like refilling water or something like that, and he'll shoot out and just kind of like periscope and just like look at my hands and like look at me in the face and things like that, and just kind of move his head back and forth between my hand and my face, just kind of seeing if I've got food there or what's going on, things like that. Not every single mastiff is going to be like that, though. I mean, they're each individual animals with their own kind of quirks and things like that. Like my striped whipsnake, for example, it's more like it won't eat with me in the room. Whenever I'm in the room, it'll kind of hang out for a little bit, but if I get too close to the cage, it'll kind of dart down into its hide there. They're just when they're out, they're really pretty and awesome to look at, but they're definitely hands off and pretty. I don't want to say anxiety prone, but they are a little bit more cautious until you get them tom feeding. Once you get them tom feeding, they realize that you're not to be that hawk or whatever that's going to come grab them. You're there. That you're the guy with the food bag and all that, and they'll be a little bit more confident then. Yeah.
The periscoping is one of the coolest things to see a snake do. I was sitting out. I wasn't in a deer blind. I was more sitting against a tree, deer hunting, and this was in October. It was bow, so it wasn't too cool out yet, and I could hear some rustling in leaves, maybe about 25 feet from me, and I kind of look over and I see a vole. Hope you guys know what I'm referring to.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Gotcha, yeah. So for those who don't know, let's just say the rodents.
Yep, there you go.
I see a vole scurrying up the hillside, and it's one of those things where you think, how could I hear that from 25 feet away? But when you're sitting in the woods, you'd be surprised how loud any of them
definitely.
So watched it, and it wasn't. 30 seconds behind it. Here's a black racer periscoping, going right up that trail, following that hole. Ended up getting it at the top of the hill. It was pretty neat to just sit there. We gave me entertainment while waiting. So
it's awesome.
So cool. Something else that you've mentioned a couple times, Connor, and it's got my attention. You mentioned this albino. There's a story behind this albino, Coachwhips. Share that with us.
Yeah. So every day I start my day by scrolling through the new posts on Fauna Classifieds. I go all the way to the end, and then I go through Morph Market all the way through with the other Colubrids section, and then I'll hop on King Snake through a few snake ID groups on Facebook and things like that. And there's one day I came across on the North Texas Snake ID, something, one of those North Texas Snake ID groups or whatever. And this guy had this photo of this albino Western Coachwhip in like one of those kind of larger deli cups there on Eco Earth. It was like super wet substrate. He had a bunch of dubias in there, and it was like growing that. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, like the Lugardi terrarium grass. There's like grass growing there, it was cool. It was just too wet and humid for that animal there. He said that he found it at his work in Midlothian, Texas area there, and he said it was too small for rodents, so he was trying to feed it dubias and crickets. and didn't have any success with it. So he was just trying to figure out what animal it was so it could he could kind of look into it a little bit more. This was during COVID time, so about 2020 is back when this was going on. So I immediately screenshotted the post, texted the guy. I was like, "Hey, it's a Western Coachwhip. They're a little bit more of a more intermediate species there. I'd be happy to kind of give you some pointers and tips with it, but I would be most interested in purchasing that animal from you." And I kind of showed him pictures of my collection, talked to him about my experience keeping Mascophis and things like that, and he agreed to sell it to me, so that way it would go to someone with the intention of producing that animal, on the condition that whenever I get around to producing a albino Western Coachwhip, that I would make sure that he was considered for one of those. So kind of helped him through the husbandry with that there. Talked about a few different other species that he was looking into, things like that. But yeah, he found the floor on the concrete floor of a warehouse he was working in at the time. Just really small, like totally like fresh out of the egg animal there. So I was a little bit bummed I couldn't herp around that area and see if there was any additional animals. I'm sure there was additional albinos that hatched out with it. But yeah, it's been in my care ever since. It started it wouldn't take rodents at first, so I started on morning geckos and just some other house geckos and things like that I could grab and find at shows, and then just that I could cheaply find outside my front door and things like that. So I got it feeding on live lizards, and then transitioned to frozen thawed lizards off tongs, then scented pinkies off tongs, and then it's kind of slowly taking it off that scenting there to hoppers, which is on now. So
I'll flip about 50,000 rocks, logs, and artificial debris in my lifetime. And never find any abnormality. Yet he finds this on the concrete slab at work. Never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah.
That is wild.
Wow.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So you mentioned that the guy that found the albino once kind of dibs on the first clutch of albinos, which obviously means that you need to breed these things.
Right.
So can you speak a little bit to the breeding process? And what you've been able to find out on your own, your personal experience with breeding them? Is it a typical North American Colubrid situation where you have to brumate, you don't have to brumate? Is it more food cycling? Kind of just stream of consciousness your way through that, and let us know your wisdom.
Yeah. So I haven't actually had a successful clutch with any Mascophis of any kind yet. I'm hoping that changes this year. I've been taking a lot of notes from a few other guys. Like I mentioned William Huntsman before. He's one of the, I guess, more passionate Mascophis keepers in the hobby that I can think of off the top of my head. Him and a handful of other guys. But William has been producing. He produced the red phase and tan phase Western Coachwhips from like the early 2000s, like 2003 until like 2012 and whatnot. And then he sold that collection to another one of my friends around that time, who's also a pretty passionate Mascophis as well. But anyway, so just getting some notes from the two of them, I've kind of slowly kind of tweaked my keeping and lined me up for my breeding season this season. So what I've done is you do the usual brumation period. I cooled them down. We're almost at 3 months there at around like the mid to upper 50s. So the wine fridge that I've got them in is kind of hovering around 56, 58 throughout that entire period there. Like I said, I've got them down for 3 months there, and then you're going to slowly bring them up, start feeding them. Start off, of course, with coming out of formation, smaller prey items. You don't want to overload their system with the big chick or something like that. Just your standard waking up procedure there. And then just that photo period, you're going to want to increase that, kind of increase that in the room already, They're at the 12 hours of photo period now, and then I'll transition that to 14 for that kind of summer period there. And then as far as pairing goes, you do have to be aware of your animals and their tendencies. My adult female Pisces came to me as a snake eater, so I'm going to have to watch them pretty closely there. So just knowing your animals, sometimes you can cohabitate those animals, which is what I plan to do whenever I get those nice PVC enclosures and my big grand reptile room set up the way I would like to do. I would like to house them in pairs or even trios with some species, some of the smaller species that I'd like to get into. But yeah, you just kind of you keep them together, and like I said, they are kind of a little bit higher strung, that little variety there. So they don't like a lot of change with their surroundings there. I know this lady Erica Ostenek, she's over in Europe, and she regularly produces Pisces, your red racers there. Your Western Coachwhips, and then I got her into stripe racers, the Mascophis lateralis or something like that, in kind of Central California there. But anyway, yeah, so she cohabitates her animals and doesn't touch them outside of providing water and food and things like that. And she's had great success that way. So I'm going to try and do what I can to cohabitate the animals. I want to make sure the female is obviously not feeding on snakes whenever I'm pairing them. Out of brumation, I plan to do a lot of lizard scenting. I got her on curly tails, those big beefy curly tail lizards before brumation, because I didn't have access to reasonably priced feeder snakes. So we're going to kind of take it goes there. But I'm going to try and not mess with them too much. Don't really disrupt their surroundings that much, but I plan to keep them together for a few hours, where I can just watch them and see how they're going to react there. And then I'll have I've got those I've got some those I forget what brand they are, but those like cameras that you can kind of mount on your glass tanks there.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Kind of keep an eye on it a little closer whenever I decide to leave them in like overnight or something like that. But ideally, I'd like to have my animals together during that breeding season together until that female lays eggs, and then I would separate them just so the male doesn't continue to pursue the female there and things like that. So.
Yeah, and on that same token, you've kind of alluded to the fact that getting these little guys to go can be a pain because of the kind of emphasis on lizards and alternative prey from what we normally feed colubrid snakes in human care.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit to that? Or I mean, obviously with your albino, it sounds like you kind of had to get that guy up and going.
Yeah.
But what's the deal with babies?
Yeah, so I've raised up a few different babies from a few different localities and things like that. So basically, they're going to go after that motion first, So you're going to want to have some type of access to a live house gecko or ground skink or something like that. House geckos work a little bit better. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's the smell or something like that they like a little bit more than the ground skinks. But even like grasshoppers too. Like, I mean, I've kept some yellow belly racers and black racers, and the crickets and things like that work with them as the hatchling neonate sizes there, So I just tried that with some coaches as well. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. It just really depends. I find a lot of the like Central Texas animals that I've got transition easier to rodents, but more of your more Western species are going to be more lizard. They're going to have a taste for lizards there, and you're going to need to do a little bit more scenting there. But yeah, so start off with some type of live prey that's going to have that good motion there to kind of trigger their response there. And once they start feeding regularly on that live prey, try to transition to tongue feeding there as best as you can. With them being that kind of smaller hatchling phase, it is a little bit tricky sometimes, but it's just a lot of you just got to sit there and be okay, just kind of doing a little bit of tease feeding there. You can sit there for even 20 minutes at a time with just this one snake.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You just got to be willing to do that.
Were you able to get a baby Coach Whip or Whipsnake to eat a cricket? Did I hear that right?
So with the racers, it's a little bit more popular there, prey source there. But yeah, I've had this one, we call her Apache because she, whenever she was caught, that she would just do the alligator roll, kind of like a helicopter propeller there. Yeah. That's what she kind of looked like there, like you're picking up a ribbon snake, something like that. But yeah. So she started off on. I would just go collect some grasshoppers because those were larger prey than the crickets there, and a little bit more to them, So yeah, a little bit of that cricket there, and then did a little bit of cricket scenting. We basically just crushed a whole bag of crickets, mixed around a pinky there, and then just keeping the similar smells, and then you just kind of wean them off as you can.
That's really cool. Here in my part of the world, we have smooth green snakes and rough green snakes, but where I'm at, smooth greens are more common. And those
are awesome.
Yeah, I had a student. That is the rarest snake where I live, and I am certain they're not really that rare. It's just a matter of they live in fields full of grass, and they look just like grass, and you just have to literally be at the right place at the right time. And one of my students caught one crossing the road on her way in from a crayfish trip, and she brought it in because I kind of had like a bounty out on them. Not that I was going to keep them per se, but I just wanted to see one from my area. So Aaron brought it in and for me to get photographs, and then we were going to take it right back out and let it go. And it was gravid, and I was like, okay. So this was last summer. So it dropped a clutch. I got all the data on it. Was not aware that those little guys will go from like being laid to hatching in about 25 days. I didn't know that.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that either.
So I went and checked in. I looked at my incubator because I took them to my house. And, there's a full freaking, they were all over the incubator too because they're so tiny. They got out of the holes I had punched in the deli cup. I was like, Jesus Christ. But I found all of them. And then I wanted to let them go, and I got a bunch of data because we were going to get a herp review note. And they were so camouflaged with the little bit of grass that I put in the damn bin that I got all the way back here and handed the bin to one of the students, and they're like, there's another snake in here. I was like, what? Sure enough, there was another snake in there, and I wanted to let them go exactly where we caught them. So I told the ZooSci kids, well, just grab some pinhead crickets and throw it in there. And that little booger ate those bugs like right off the bat. Like it wasn't, I don't even think it had shed. I think it was like 2 days old and it was already like pounding crickets. But other than that, that's the only time I've heard of a snake actually eating an insect. So
actually I've got a buddy that's kept those a little bit more long term. The smooth greens, and he said he thinks of them a little bit more as the racer type, just because he had them in with some ribbon snakes, and they actually ate the ribbon snakes, which was pretty
crazy.
So like they were like kind of younger red striped ribbon snakes.
So
that's kind of an interesting note there.
The smooth green went back. He's slithering around the field that they were found in, but no, that's nuts.
Well, talking about the insects, I gotta jump in with just a quick one myself.
Sure, go for it.
Green bush rat snakes, Christina. Believe it or not, the katydids, if I'm saying it right, like you know what I'm talking about, katydids, kind of grasshopper looking thing. Yeah, they'll tear those up.
No joke. That's crazy.
Yeah. I have a friend, Megan, who we first started speaking about green bush rat snakes. She reached out with some questions, and over time, I mean, that's something that she let me know is that's hers. It's their favorite meal. You know, whenever it wouldn't eat for her, if she threw one of those in, bam, it was on it.
Whoa.
That's the same thing with buttermilk racers as well. I've got friends that'll go out there and as soon as they pick them up, there's always like beetle, musk, and poop or whatever that they're just excreting all over the place. I've got a few friends that keep them in captivity, and they tend to prefer the like they'll tongue feed on crickets or grasshoppers, and then you give them a fuzzy or something like that on the tongs after a few crickets. Or something. They'll take that.
Cool.
Yeah, it's cool that grasshoppers are a little bit more accessible now as far as feeders go from the Cali grasshoppers down there. So that's neat.
Cool. So I want to jump over to this project you have outside of keeping, but it has everything to do with keeping. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast is I had seen on social media that you were making reference to a book project you were working on. Being that I just wrapped up a book project, I know what that entails. And I will honestly say that if you go through the process of, doing the deep dive on the biology and the natural history and then reaching out to everybody, it totally makes you, it engages you with the animals you keep at a whole other level when you decide that you're going to take something like this on, if you're doing it the right way. And there's lots of good books out there. There's lots of bad books out there. But I'm certain yours is going to be a good one because we were talking about it beforehand, and you definitely, I'm excited about this because the world needs more Colubrid books. But can you talk a little bit about your book project and who you're doing it? You have a co-author and just what your plans are and all that jazz.
Yeah. So I prefer the term Mascophus just because that's what I grew up starting with and knowing about, or I guess that's how I was introduced to these species and things like that. But the current taxonomy, as it's been explained to me, is that they are referred to as Colubrid. Now they're back into Colubrid, which in my own personal keeping, I will always refer to them as Mascophus just because that's just how I am, I guess. But to keep it relevant to, I guess, updated taxonomy and things like that, we're going to go and call it, we haven't officially created the title yet, but it's going to be a book kind of going over general Colubrid care. And we've broken it down into sections because now that we've lumped Mascophus into Colubrid, there's a bunch of different species there, that all have different requirements and things like that. So we've kind of got three sections as far as the husbandry goes. Or let me kind of back up here. So with the book, we're going to start off the opening section there will be a species list with a species breakdown where we're going to go into, there's going to be a range map for each species on their own individual species. There's going to be 2 or 3 pages for each species where we go into the physical description of the animal, the habitat description, and then just a few interesting notes about the species. And then there's going to be a few photos, like in situ photos of that species, showing kind of the different phenotype variations and things like that. A few habitat photos, and then a range map, like I said, for each of those species. And for Mascophus, there is 17 recognized species, but there are 3 referenced subspecies of neotropical racer, the neotropical whipsnake, or neotropical coachwhip, whatever you want to call it, common name, the Mascophus mentovarius. And then there's 2 referenced subspecies of the Sonoran whipsnake, Mascophus billinatus. So there's going to be a deep dive into each of those. And then all Colubrid as well, with those range maps and things like that. And then once we go through the deep dive into each species and kind of go through all that, there's going to be 3 different sections where we go into the just general husbandry and care, because there is differences between how I would keep a racer, like I said, kept black racers and yellow belly racers, the eastern yellow belly racers before. There's definitely differences in keeping those compared to Coachwhips compared to your Whipsnakes. There's a little bit more similarity between your Coachwhips and Whipsnakes as far as captive care goes. So we're breaking those sections out a little bit into their own kind of chapters, I guess. Chapters there. And then from there, we're going to go into kind of emulating a little bit of the things that they touch on in like the complete sub-awk. If you guys are familiar with that book there, talking about a few diseases or just things you got to watch out with, like health-wise, and how to choose an animal. Because a lot of these are captive, or a lot of them are wild caught. Excuse me, they're not quite captive bred in numbers that you would find any other common snake, in captivity. And then after that, there's just going to be, my favorite part of it is just going into this locality section where we just have photos, maybe 6 to 8 photos or whatever of each species, just from different parts of their range. Because if you look at eastern Coachwhips, they're some of the most beautiful snakes out there. Like you find the ones in Florida, that are that almost like sand white gradient to the black head. Absolutely insane looking animals there. And then you look at eastern Coachwhips in the Ozarks, like in Missouri, and you've got some animals that are like solid black with like this red mottling or gold mottling and banding and things like that. And it's just absolutely insane. So I'm just really just I'm not sure what word I'm trying to say, but it's just really exciting to see all that. So yeah, that's the rough outline of the book there. But I'm kind of taking more of the Mascophus side here with and then William, my co-author, he's got a little bit more experience with the Colubrid, your North American racers there, and then some of your like Mexican species. Well, I guess that's North America as well. Sorry, but yeah, so he's primarily helping with that section there, as well as adding the notes with the breeding, just because I haven't got there yet. But it's been a lot of fun diving into some of the books that I've been able to find, and just reading about some of these species and the cool little facts about some of these snakes. Like I talked to Zach a little bit earlier about this, but there's this species, the Clarion Island whipsnake, Mascophus anthonii. They're native to the Clarion Island, and it's an island off the coast of Baja, California there. And there's like 3 or 4 reptile species on the island and a few birds and things like that. To my knowledge, I don't think there's any endemic mammals there. So these Clarion Island whipsnakes, what they do is throughout the year, they'll prey heavily on the Clarion Island tree lizard. I forget the scientific name there, but they're these like bright, like electric blue lizards. They're like I'd say like 5 to 6 inches long there. Really beautiful blue lizards there. And then for like I don't know if it's fall or spring, but there's a seasonal period where these birds come in and they lay eggs and they nest on these rock kind of cliffs areas. And so these snakes will kind of travel from the kind of lower area up to where these birds are nesting, and then they'll just like gorge themselves on birds before the wintertime. But because they're only eating birds and lizards, they've got quite like really oily meat and skin and things like that. So that kind of translates to the snake themselves, and there's references of them like actually being oily to the touch, or like just something a little bit weird to them compared to a normal Colubrid, which I find is really interesting, and I'm loving things like that. And then just talking to a few other herpers that come across some of the snakes down in Mexico, that I'm not as fortunate to see, like these neotropical whipsnakes. They're just almost as big as a crebo. Like they're very heavy bodied, beautiful snakes, very thick. You wouldn't think that they'd be a Mascophus based on how they look, but I mean they are insane. They're just total beasts. But yeah.
Yeah, I was telling you beforehand that I got to see the Neotropical Coachwhip or Whipsnake, but I think the common name's Coachwhip, Neotropical Coachwhip.
Yeah. The Mentavarius, yeah.
Yeah, Mentavarius, and that was in Costa Rica, and it was a 7-foot beast, and it was as big as around my forearm. It had the exact dimensions of our yellowtail Cribos here at school, so just an absolutely gigantic animal. So as someone who's just gone through this process, so obviously, like, Connor does not. All right, so let's talk a little bit about photographs, because I can flat out tell you, when you write one of these, you do not realize how many photographs you need. Justin Julander, I distinctly remember when this was like a year and a half ago. I don't even know how long ago it was. I've lost track of all time when it comes to that book. But I said, like, I'm done. And then he and Nick Mutton were like, you think you're done? Because I hadn't found a photograph. Like, I didn't have the photographs. And there's over 200 photographs in this book. So I can flat out say that, you know, if you have what you deem to be really good photographs of this group of snakes, don't be upset if Connor doesn't use them. But if you're willing to donate them to Connor's cause, I, by all means, encourage you to reach out to him on social media and maybe fire one away. And the standard of what constitutes a good photograph for a book, that's up to your copy editor or the editor. So, you know, it's got to make it past the gatekeeper that is the editor. But I can speak for Connor that he can use any and all. And especially if you're doing a locality approach, there might be somebody out there that has some wackadoodle locality of one of these things that you don't know about that would, you know, increase the utility of the book that much more.
Definitely. Yeah. It's been very tough for me to find photos of the Baja California racer, Baja California stripe racer, the Alameda stripe racer, and then, of course, the Clarion Island whipsnake, just because it's a protected island. So there's like 7 or 8 photos on iNaturalist, and I've been emailing every single person that I can get an email from, or email address from, just searching the webs, you know, trying to get in contact with these people. But it's been tough.
No, by all means. So if you want to, if you're listening to this and you're a herper, or you even keep them in human care,
totally, I'd love to see different ways that people are keeping these snakes. I mean, I think it's important to not just show one side. You know, it's important to see that because what I'm doing might not necessarily work for yourself or for other people. You know, so.
Yep.
Anyway, I'd love to see the different styles of keeping there. I know a friend in Florida that keeps a pair of Eastern Coachwhips in an actual, like, outdoor screen enclosure that he built himself, just in his backyard, and they're doing great. So that's really neat.
Gosh, Zach's writing a book, Connor's writing a book, Clint's writing a grocery list. I mean, you guys are making me need to up my game, I think. Wow. I don't know. You're kind of scaring me. Hearing how much work goes into it. Hats off to you, gentlemen, for sure. Wow.
Thanks.
Well, Connor, after the book is done, and I'm sure you want to take a long break after that. What's next? What species are interesting you? You know, where do you think you go after this?
Yeah, so currently the Mascophus species that I'm keeping are your Pisceus, those red racers there, the Mascophus flagellum Pisceus, the Western Coachwhips, the Testicus there, Sonoran Whipsnake, the Billinotis, and the Striped Whipsnake. I would love to find mates for my Sonoran Whipsnake and my Striped Whipsnake before I expand into something else, just because I'd like to have a pair where I'm able to produce, you know, and get animals out there. I don't believe in wild caught animals as pets, you know, and currently that's what they're doing, just being lone animals in my collection, you know. So I would love once I get those animals paired up and things like that. Pretty much the only other species that I'd like to keep would be I'd like to get back into Shots Whipsnakes. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with those. They're Central Texas. They're pretty similar to your Ruthvens there. They got really nice orange chin. They can kind of get some nice blues in them down in South Texas. Really pretty, beautiful snakes there. I had a Central Texas whipsnake as well. That's Mascophus taenius giardi, subspecies of that striped whipsnake there. One of the prettiest animals that I've seen in my entire life. They've got really nice black and gray colors with a really excellent pattern there, and then they've got that beautiful pink tail that all of your taenius, or I'm pretty sure I'm butchering that word there. I apologize. All of the striped whipsnake kind of subspecies have. It's really pretty there. But that one seems to be pretty tough to find alive. At least there's tons of DOR examples there. And then just after hearing about the neotropical whipsnakes or Coachwhips or whatnot, the Mentavarius, I think that's probably the as far as Mascophus goes, that's what I would like to add. The neotropical whipsnake there. Hopefully a pair of Central Texas whipsnakes and then a pair of Shots whipsnakes. But outside of that, I've been really digging the night snakes, the Hypsiglena.
Yeah.
There's a few. I'm keeping the Texas night snakes, the Jani there, Jani texana, and then I recently picked up some desert night snakes as well, the Torquata there. But I'd like to add the San Diegos, which are kind of on the smaller side as far as Hypsiglena goes, kind of on of course, the San Diego area there along the coast. It's really neat, smaller animals there that I just think are pretty cool. And then the Mesa Verdes, because the Mesa Verdes in Utah, they've got a little bit more of a, I guess the patterning is a little bit more bold because they've got kind of like a paler backdrop, which I just really like. So yeah.
Connor, I want to tell you, you're the first guest that I've listened to on the podcast that I've been Googling so much during this conversation because every time you say a species, I'm like, what does that look like? What does that look like? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty. Ooh, that's cool. Ooh, that's pretty. So, like I say, it really opened my eyes to so much of these particular species. And neat. Really, and
something else I'd like to do is with the people that I do talk with on the regular that are also passionate about Coachwhips and Mascophus in general. I've seen if you guys are familiar with Brett Dunn and the Garter guy, and
yes.
Brett Dunn and Rob Shea, they're doing a lot of like garter snake breeding collaboration projects to help kind of get just better genes in the hobby and things like that. But I'd like to see something similar to Mascophus. I know it would be a little bit tougher with them being a little bit more anxious as far as the moving around and things like that. But William and I have been talking about setting up something for our Pisces because we both keep those. And I'd like to see a little bit of kind of collaboration there with some of us that have lone animals, that don't necessarily have a mate that is owned by us, but we can kind of just work together to establish these species. I think that's important. Because I'm kind of limited, I guess, in my case. Like, I can't produce enough Coachwhips for everyone that wants a Coachwhip. I can't produce enough. As much as I would love to produce enough Sonoran Whipsnakes, for the hobby, I can't do that on my own.
Yeah, no, I'm very interested in the Hypsiglena. We'll definitely be having you back on if you'll take the invitation to talk about them specifically.
Yeah, definitely. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah, they're also a Dipsatid, so they're in that group that I am a little partial to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic, Connor. We always ask our guests. This is kind of Matt's tradition. So while Matt's like living it up down in Florida, and Clint and I are doing the Lord's work with this podcast.
I feel like I should bark or something just to make it feel like Matt's in the room.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we need Cujo in the background going nuts.
That's right.
Anyway, what do you think? What direction do you think herpetoculture is going in? Do you like the direction it's going in? Do you not like the direction? Do you think we're kind of heading towards a united front, or this kind of niche approach where we have our silos is okay, it's divisive? Just kind of talk about this from the perspective of a young person in the hobby who's doing great things.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for that compliment. I appreciate that. I don't feel like I'm very like I'm doing a whole lot. I'm just kind of keeping what I like and just.
Oh, you're doing more than you know.
It's cool that people like what I'm doing. So that's awesome. Anyway, so as far as like the hobby as a whole, and being kind of, I guess, compared to other people a little bit newer, I guess I've only been keeping snakes for about 7 years now. I think there were some good things that came out of that COVID break, like these podcasts and things like that.
Yep.
Kind of opened up or made me aware of other keepers that are like super niche focused like I am now. And I think it's great that we're working with some of these more underrated species and things like that, and actively trying to produce these in captivity and things like that. But also, like, you got to think with that, like, something that I've kind of been thinking about recently is, like, if I breed these, or if I get successful eggs with these red racers, these Pisces, like, what is the market going to be like with that? How many responsible keepers are there out there that are going to be able to do these guys justice? Should I be able to offer babies out to people and I don't just decide to keep everything for myself, because that's what I tend to do. So that's definitely something that we need to think about with some of these more uncommon things and stuff like that. But I think the podcasts have been great, kind of helping reinforce some of those values into like ethical keeping and things like that. The things that I definitely hate seeing are just in a lot. I'm sure you guys have the same thing with these local Facebook groups when there's a reptile expo, and then a month later everybody's just trying to rehome like whatever morph or whatever came in or whatever. I don't know. Just impulse buys kind of suck, but I'd like to see. I forget what podcast I was listening to. That's kind of what I do whenever I'm at the zoo, because I'm just in a building by myself with 200 snakes.
Yeah.
But one of the podcasts I was listening to, this guy was talking about how I think it was like breeding chameleons or something like that. Like he would take an entire setup with his adult chameleon in there and just have that on his table to show like, this is what you need to get. This is what you should expect, and here's some photos of like other animals in my collection, how I keep these guys, things like that, and like have like actual, just like a general care guide or something there available on the table so people know what they're getting into,
Yeah.
I think that would be something really awesome to see. And if I produce enough to be able to vend at a show, I would like to kind of do something similar to that. Obviously I can't bring a 6-foot PVC enclosure in there. But I can bring kind of a nice display and kind of help people with questions and things like that. But I think that would be pretty important. And then just kind of with some of these more niche things, just don't be an asshole. Hopefully, don't be a jerk, but just kind of vet people a little bit more so that these animals end up with people that will truly care about them, and not just stick them in like a plastic tub or something like that,
No, that's a fantastic answer to that. And then we didn't even get to talk about your job at the zoo. I mean, it really must suck to have to spend 3 days a week working with Louisiana pine snakes. I mean, geez.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, congrats on
thankfully, thankfully the adults are in brumation, so there's not as much poop painting that I have to deal with, but that's going to change in a couple weeks.
Hell yeah.
Head printing and stuff, but so it's fun.
All righty. Well, if people want to find out what's going on in your world and kind of keep updated on your various projects, how do you recommend people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so don't be afraid to reach out. Try and answer as many questions as I can, just given my work schedule and things like that. But you can find me on Instagram at Naturalist Herps, all one word, no spaces there. Just look up Connor Wardle and you'll see Naturalist Herps there as well. You can find me on YouTube, that same, just Connor Wardle there, and you'll find me on YouTube. I've got a bunch of different care guides on some of the more niche things that I keep. And then Facebook as well, just Connor Wardle there as well. I'm in a few different Facebook groups. If you want to find more specifically with Mascophis, I've got 2 groups. One of those is the Coachwhips, Whipsnakes, and Racers Facebook group, as well as the locality Mascophis and Colubroid group on Facebook as well. Those would be the best spots for those. And yeah, like I said, reach out. I feel like I'm a pretty friendly person, or I try to be a friendly person, and just let me know. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
All righty. And if you want to find me, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zach Loken on Facebook. Look me up online if you want to fire off an email and go old school, which several people have done in the past couple months. My perpetual pleading for people to reach out about graduate school is starting to pay off. I've had quite a few people reach out in the past couple months, and some are committing, and the applied herpetology and herpetoculture lab at West Liberty University is about to explode. The crayfish students are kind of like, what about us, Dad? I'm the only person they know of who has 2 labs, because I'm not a masochist at all. So, but it's not work if you're having fun. So, and working with the students is absolutely the best part of my day, unequivocally. Sitting in the meetings with the adults, we're not going to talk about that because this is supposed to be fun. So, yeah, reach out. Please do. We have people working now with a bunch of indigo snake projects, false water cobra projects, dart frog projects now that we're working with Josh's frogs on, and then a bunch of other stuff. So that's me, Clint. If people want to find you, where do they go?
All right, on Facebook, I am Clint Bartley. We also have our Metazotics Facebook page. That's Metazotics. On Instagram, we're Metazotics LLC. And if you ever happen to be in southern Indiana, come by the shop. Come visit us.
Heck yeah.
520 West Lincoln Avenue, Chandler, Indiana.
Yes. And so, with that, this has been another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. We are happy to be part of the Morelia Python Network. And whatever time of day or night you are listening to this, I hope everything's going well in your world. Have a great one. Bye.